Commander Royce Thatcher's laughter cut across the morning briefing like a blade. "You want to run the advanced sweep drill?" He repeated Lieutenant Kira Vanson's request loud enough that every SEAL in the Tactical Operations Center could hear. His eyes moved deliberately to Chief Warrant Officer Dane Walcott, who stood near the equipment lockers wearing an expression that said he'd already written off the next 10 minutes as wasted time. "The success rate on that drill is 19%, Lieutenant, among operators with 5+ years in special operations." Thatcher's clipboard tapped against his thigh in a rhythm that suggested impatience barely held in check. 3 generals had arrived at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado that morning for the quarterly capabilities assessment. General Harlan Bridger stood near the observation window with his arms crossed, his silver hair catching the hard California light. General Elias Cortland was younger, maybe 50, with the build of someone who still ran with his troops. He leaned against the wall, checking his watch. General Marcus Fenwick had settled into a chair near the briefing table, his face already set in the neutral expression of someone prepared to witness mediocrity. The bet started before Kira finished a request. Petty Officer First Class Garrett Landry muttered to the operator beside him, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. $20, says she doesn't complete the first transition. His companion, a sniper named Torres, shook his head slowly. "I'll take that action, but you're being generous. She won't make it past target acquisition." The range outside stretched toward the hills in graduated distances. Steel targets waited at intervals that tested even experienced marksmen. The advanced sweep drill required engaging 6 targets in rapid succession while transitioning between 3 firing positions. The targets were arranged to simulate a high-value protection scenario. 3 of them, the ones at extreme range, were designated as general targets in the training scenario. Hit all 6 within the time limit with acceptable accuracy and you passed. Miss 1 and the entire drill reset to 0. Kira had cleaned rifles in the armory for 8 months. She'd arrived at Coronado with orders that put her in weapons maintenance, a perfectly respectable assignment that kept her away from the operational side of the base. She'd stripped and rebuilt every rifle system the SEALs used. She knew the trigger pull weight on each weapon, the exact cant of every sight, which rifles shot slightly left at distance, and which ones held true. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of courage where you're from, or maybe you know someone who proved the doubters wrong when nobody expected it. Thatcher was still waiting for her to withdraw the request. His silence had become pointed. The 3 generals remained in their positions, but their attention had shifted fully to the conversation. This wasn't part of their scheduled assessment, but apparently it was interesting enough to interrupt the morning's planned demonstrations. "Lieutenant," Thatcher said, and his tone had shifted into something that might have been mistaken for concern if you didn't notice how his jaw was set. "This drill is designed for operators who've been in combat, who've taken fire and returned it. The washout rate in training is 73%. He paused to let that number settle. "Even among our experienced combat veterans, only 1 in 5 completes it successfully on the first attempt." Kira kept her hands loose at her sides. "I understand the parameters, sir." Her voice was steady, no defensiveness in it, just a statement of fact. "I'd like to attempt the drill." Walcott shifted his weight near the equipment lockers. His eyes moved to Landry and Torres, then back to Kira. The betting pool was growing. She could see money changing hands near the far wall where a group of operators had gathered. The odds were apparently not in her favor. General Bridger's voice carried from the observation window. "Commander, if the lieutenant wants to demonstrate, let's see what she can do." His tone was neutral, but there was something underneath it. Not quite amusement, more like the voice of someone who'd already calculated the outcome and was willing to watch it play out for the educational value. Thatcher's clipboard stopped tapping. He studied Kira for a long moment. "The range is set up for the scheduled demonstration at 0900. If you want to attempt this, you'll run it first. That gives you 30 minutes to prepare." He turned slightly to address the room. "Target designation is standard HVP scenario. 6 targets, 3 positions, 90-second time limit." 3 of the targets are marked general for the purposes of this training iteration. He looked back at Kira. Any questions? Just one, sir. Kira met his eyes directly. Which rifle am I using? Your choice, Lieutenant. Thatcher gestured toward the equipment lockers where a dozen rifles waited in their racks. They're all zeroed. They're all maintained to spec. He didn't say it, but the implication hung in the air anyway. The equipment won't be your limitation. Torres leaned toward Landry near the wall. She's going to pick something she's familiar with. Probably ask for the M4 platform. Keep it simple. His voice was low, but Kira heard every word. The acoustics in the operations center carried sound in strange patterns. Landry shook his head. Doesn't matter what she picks. The drill's designed to break people down. You've seen it. The target transitions alone are brutal. General Fenwick stood from his chair, his movement drawing attention. I haven't seen this drill run in about 6 months. He addressed Thatcher directly. Are we still using the lateral movement requirement between positions? Affirmative, sir. Thatcher's response was crisp. 10 meters lateral minimum, low crawl under observation wire, then final position acquisition, all while maintaining time standard. Fenwick nodded slowly. His eyes moved to Kira, and something in his expression suggested he was already composing the after-action report in his mind. The kind that would explain why allowing unqualified personnel to attempt advanced training was a waste of resources. Kira walked toward the equipment lockers. Her boots made almost no sound on the concrete floor, but somehow the room had gone quiet enough that every step registered. Walcott moved aside as she approached, giving her access to the rifle racks. His face showed nothing, but his body language said he was ready to catch her when the reality of what she'd requested finally registered. The rifles waited in their designated positions. She could see the ones that had been used recently, slight oil residue near the charging handles, minimal dust on the rail systems. Her hands had cleaned most of these weapons in the past month. She knew which ones the senior operators preferred, which ones were assigned to the newest team members still proving themselves. She reached past the M4 variants. Her hand settled on a rifle near the back of the rack. The MK-13 Mod 7, a bolt-action precision rifle that the snipers use for extreme range work. Chambered in .300 Norma Magnum. Effective range, well past 1,500 meters in the right hands. Torres stopped talking. The bedding near the far wall went silent. Even Landry's expression shifted from dismissive certainty to something approaching confusion. Thatcher's clipboard resumed its tapping, faster now. Lieutenant, that's a sniper platform. The drill requires rapid target engagement across multiple positions. You're selecting a bolt gun? Yes, sir. Kira lifted the rifle from its rack. The weight settled into her hands like it had been waiting. I'm familiar with this system. General Cortland pushed away from the wall. He moved closer to the observation window that overlooked the range. His watch checking had stopped. The range stretched out under morning sun that was already turning the air thick with heat. Kira walked the distance with the MK-13 carried in a low ready position, the rifle's weight distributed exactly as it should be. Behind her, the Tactical Operations Center had emptied. Every SEAL who'd been inside now stood at the observation windows or had moved to the outdoor viewing area that overlooked the firing positions. Thatcher walked beside her, his clipboard tucked under one arm. His stride suggested a man who'd made this walk thousands of times, but never with quite this level of skepticism radiating from every step. The targets are marked Alpha through Foxtrot. He gestured toward the steel plates, waiting at graduated distances. Alpha and Bravo are at 300 meters. Charlie and Delta at 600. Echo and Foxtrot are the designated general targets. They're at 1,200 and 1,800 meters, respectively. Kira studied the range while he talked. The positions were marked with orange flags. Position 1 was a standard bench rest setup. Position 2 required a transition across open ground, then shooting from supported prone. Position 3 was elevated, a platform that simulated shooting from a vehicle or rooftop. The observation wire he'd mentioned earlier stretched between positions 1 and 2, forcing a low crawl under simulated enemy observation. Behind them, Walcott's voice carried across the morning air. He was addressing the gathered SEALs, his tone that of an instructor explaining a training evolution to students. The drill's designed around rapid target engagement. The M4 platform gives you the speed you need for the time standard. A bolt gun means she's got to work the action between every shot. 6 targets, 90 seconds. That's 15 seconds per target, including all transitions. One of the younger operators, a man Kira recognized from the armory as Mitchell, spoke up. His voice had the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything that mattered. Even if she hits the close targets, those general plates at extreme range are basically impossible with a bolt gun in this time frame. You need follow-up shots at that distance. Wind calls adjustments. She gets 1 shot per target. Torres leaned against the railing of the observation deck. She won't even make it to the extreme range targets. Watch. She'll burn too much time on the transitions. The low crawl alone is going to eat 30 seconds minimum. General Bridger had taken position at the far end of the observation deck. He stood apart from the SEALs, but his attention was completely focused on the range below. General Cortland joined him, and their conversation was too quiet to hear, but their body language suggested they were discussing whether to stop the drill before it became an embarrassment. General Fenwick remained inside the operations center, visible through the windows, his phone out, as if already preparing to document what was about to unfold. Kira reached position 1 and set the rifle down on the bench rest. The bench was solid, sandbags positioned for support, everything arranged to give a shooter the best possible platform. She checked the scope settings, confirmed the 0 marks that indicated this rifle was set up for a specific operator's preferences. The ammunition was already staged, 10 rounds of .300 Norma Magnum in a box beside the shooting position. Thatcher moved to stand beside the bench. His clipboard was out again, ready to document times and results. You'll begin on my mark. He glanced at his watch, then back at the range. 90 seconds from first shot to last shot. All 6 targets must show impact within acceptable tolerance. The general targets require center mass hits. Any questions before we begin? Kira loaded 5 rounds into the rifle's magazine. The bolt slid forward with the precision that came from proper maintenance and quality manufacturing. She settled into position behind the rifle, her body alignment automatic, muscle memory from thousands of repetitions that nobody here had witnessed. No questions, sir. Landry had positioned himself where he could see both the firing line and the targets through a spotting scope. He spoke to Torres without looking away from his optic. First target's at 300. Even if she hits it, she's got to break position, transition, get under that wire, make position 2, and still have time for 4 more targets. This is going to be painful to watch. The SEALs had gone mostly quiet. The ambient sound was wind moving across the base, distant machinery, the flag snapping on its pole near the headquarters building. Kira could feel the weight of their attention, the certainty in their silence that said they were witnessing someone about to fail spectacularly. Thatcher raised his hand. His voice carried across the range with the authority of someone who'd run thousands of training evolutions. Shooter ready? Ready. Kira's response was calm. Her breathing had already settled into the rhythm that preceded good shooting. Stand by. Thatcher's hand dropped. Execute. The first shot broke before most observers registered she'd taken aim. The sound of .300 Norma Magnum was distinctive, a sharp crack that echoed off the buildings behind them. Target Alpha, 300 meters out, rang with the metallic tone of a direct hit before the sound of the shot had finished echoing. Kira's hands moved immediately. Bolt back, brass ejecting in a golden arc that caught sunlight. New round chambering, bolt forward and locked. The second target, Bravo at 300 meters, took the hit 4 seconds after the first. The steel sang twice, confirming both impacts. Mitchell's voice from the observation deck carried disbelief. Did she just double-tap 300 meters in under 5 seconds with a bolt gun? Kira was already moving. The rifle came up from the bench rest, carried at ready position as she broke into a ground-covering run toward position 2. Her boots hit the packed earth in a rhythm that suggested someone who'd done plenty of conditioning work. The distance between positions was marked at 50 meters, and she covered it in seconds that ticked away against Thatcher's stopwatch. The observation wire stretched 18 inches off the ground, marked with flags that simulated enemy surveillance. Kira dropped into the low crawl without breaking stride. The rifle cradled across her forearms, body flat to the earth. She moved under the wire with speed that suggested she'd done this movement so many times it had become instinctive rather than deliberate. Torres had his stopping scope locked on her movement. "She's at 35 seconds. He did the math aloud, his voice tight with the concentration of someone checking calculations that didn't match expectations. "She's got 55 seconds left and 4 targets remaining, 2 of them at extreme range." Walcott stood motionless at the observation rail. His arms were no longer crossed. His hands gripped the metal railing hard enough that his knuckles showed white against his skin. The expression on his face suggested a man watching something that violated his understanding of how the world worked. Kira cleared the wire and rolled into position 2. The shooting position here was prone, supported by a bipod that was already in place. She settled behind the rifle with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this exact movement in conditions far worse than a training range in California. The scope picture came up, target Charlie at 600 meters centered in the reticule. Wind call made in the half-second before she pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke. Target Charlie rang immediately. Bolt cycle, new round. Target Delta at 600 meters acquired and engaged. The steel confirmed the hit with the sound that every shooter waited to hear. 4 targets down, 2 remaining, both at extreme range, both designated as general targets, both requiring absolute precision. 48 seconds elapsed. Kira broke position and began the final transition. Position 3 was elevated 12 feet off the ground, a platform designed to simulate shooting from a technical vehicle or urban rooftop. The latter waited, metal rungs that would eat precious seconds from the remaining time. Kira hit the base of the ladder with the rifle slung across her back, both hands free for the climb. Her boots found each rung with deliberate speed, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Thatcher's voice cut through the morning air with the precision of a man calling splits at a track meet. 55 seconds elapsed. 35 seconds remaining. The observation deck had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have paused, waiting to see what would happen next. General Bridger had moved to the railing, his hands gripping the metal bar as he leaned forward to watch. General Cortlandt stood beside him, his phone forgotten in his pocket, his entire attention locked on the elevated platform, where Kira was settling into the final firing position. Torres still had his eye locked to the spotting scope. His voice was tight, the words coming out like he was narrating something he couldn't quite believe he was seeing. Target Echo is at 1,200 meters. Wind's variable, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour from the west. That's a 1,000-yard shot with a bolt gun under time pressure. His companion beside him, a sniper named Rourke, shook his head slowly without speaking. Kira's breathing cycled down as she found her position behind the rifle. The platform had sandbags arranged in AV configuration, giving solid support for the rifle's bipod. She settled in with the economy of movement that came from having done this so many times that thought no longer entered the equation. The scope picture came up clean. Target Echo appeared in the reticule, a steel plate marked with a distinctive star that designated it as a general target in the training scenario. The wind flags along the range showed movement, but not consistent movement. At 300 meters, the flags hung nearly still. At 600, they showed a steady left-to-right push. At 1,200, the flags were dancing, suggesting gusts that would push a bullet off course if the timing wasn't perfect. Landry had abandoned his spotting scope to watch through binoculars, as if changing optics might change what he was seeing. "She's going to miss." He said it quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Nobody's shooting 1,200 meters under time pressure with a cold-bore rifle and making the hit. Not on the first shot. Mitchell stood beside him, his earlier confidence replaced by something approaching confusion. "She hit 4 targets in under a minute. With a bolt gun. How is that even possible?" Walcott's voice came from behind them. And for the first time since the drill started, there was something other than skepticism in his tone. "I've been running this course for 6 years. The record time for completion is 2 minutes 17 seconds. That was set by a SEAL sniper with 8 years in the teams." He paused, watching Kira on the elevated platform. She's at 58 seconds elapsed with 2 targets remaining. The rifle on the platform remained steady. Kira's eye was locked to the scope, her body motionless behind the weapon. The wind flags at extreme range showed a momentary lull in the gusts, just a 2-second window where the air settled into something approaching stable. She pressed the trigger. The shot broke with the same sharp crack that had marked every previous engagement. The sound traveled across the range and echoed back from the hills beyond. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The distance was too great for immediate confirmation. The bullet time of flight at 1,200 meters meant everyone on the observation deck held their breath while physics played out. Then target echo rang with the unmistakable sound of a center mass hit. The steel plate swung on its mount, the star marking clearly visible even at extreme range. The metallic tone carried back across the distance like a bell announcing something nobody had expected to hear. Torres straightened from his spotting scope. His face showed the expression of someone who'd just watched math stop working the way it was supposed to. Center punch, 1,200 meters. First round hit. His voice carried across the observation deck, and every head turned to look at him, as if confirming he'd actually said those words. Thatcher checked his stopwatch, his thumb hovering over the button but not pressing it yet. 68 seconds elapsed. 22 seconds remaining. 1 target left. On the elevated platform, Kira's hands moved through the bolt cycle with a mechanical precision that came from thousands of repetitions. Brass ejected, spinning through the California sun. New round chambered. Bolt forward and locked. The rifle came back to her shoulder, and the scope picture returned. Target Foxtrot, 1,800 meters. The designated general target at the absolute limit of the range's capability. General Fenwick had emerged from the operations center. He stood at the top of the stairs leading down to the range, his phone clutched in one hand but forgotten. His eyes were locked on the elevated platform where a lieutenant who was supposed to be in weapons maintenance was attempting a shot that most of the snipers in his command would consider nearly impossible. Rourke spoke quietly to Torres, his voice carrying the technical assessment of someone who understood exactly what was required for the shot being attempted. 1,800 meters is a mile. The bullet drop alone is massive. Wind drift at that distance can be measured in feet. She's got 20 seconds left to calculate dope, confirm wind, and make the shot. He didn't finish the sentence because there wasn't a conclusion that made sense. The wind flags at extreme range were still moving, but in the pattern that experienced shooters learn to read. Not random. Consistent enough for someone who understood what they were looking at. Kira's adjustment was minimal, just a click of elevation and a hair of windage. Her breathing settled into the final rhythm before the shot. Landry lowered his binoculars. She's not going to make it. The time's too tight. Even if she had the shot calculated perfectly, she's got maybe 15 seconds left. That's not enough time to confirm everything at that range. Mitchell didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the elevated platform, watching something that was rewriting his understanding of what was possible in the time frames he'd been taught to expect. Walcott had moved to stand beside Thatcher. The two men watched the stopwatch together, the digital display counting up toward the 90-second mark that would determine success or failure. 75 seconds. 78. 80. The numbers climbed with the relentless precision of time that didn't care about the difficulty of what was being attempted. On the platform, Kira pressed the trigger for the 6th time. The rifle spoke. The sound traveled across the range and echoed back from terrain features that turned the single crack into multiple reverberations. Everyone on the observation deck went motionless. The bullet time of flight at 1,800 meters seemed to stretch into forever, seconds ticking past while the projectile traveled through air that pushed and pulled at it with forces that could turn a perfect shot into a near miss. The wind flags at extreme range rippled. The morning sun climbed higher, changing the light across the steel targets. Thatcher's thumb hovered over the stopwatch button. General Bridger leaned so far forward over the railing that someone reached out instinctively, as if to catch him. General Cortland had his hand raised to shade his eyes, squinting toward the extreme range target. Target Foxtrot rang. The sound was distinct, unmistakable, the metallic tone of a bullet striking steel at center mass. The plate swung on its mount, the star marking visible for just a moment before it settled back into position. The echo of the impact traveled back across the range, while everyone processed what they just witnessed. Thatcher's thumb pressed the stopwatch button. His voice came out steady, but something underneath it had shifted. Time: 83 seconds. All 6 targets confirmed hit. Drill complete. The observation deck erupted in noise that wasn't quite celebration and wasn't quite disbelief. It was something in between, the sound of people who'd just watched their understanding of capability get recalibrated in less than 90 seconds. Kira descended the ladder with the same controlled speed she'd used to climb it. The rifle was slung across her back, her hands finding each rung with the muscle memory of someone who'd done ladder work in conditions far more demanding than a sunny morning at Coronado. Her boots hit the ground, and she unslung the weapon, carrying it at low ready as she walked back toward the observation deck, where what looked like every SEAL on the base had gathered. The noise from the deck had transformed into something more structured. Conversations were happening in tight groups, operators leaning close to each other as they processed what they'd witnessed. Torres still stood at his spotting scope, but as I was no longer pressed to the optic, he was staring at the scope itself, as if the equipment had somehow provided false information that needed to be recalibrated. Thatcher met her halfway across the range. His clipboard was tucked under his arm again, but his grip on it had changed. Less certain somehow. His face showed the careful neutrality of a commander who'd just watched a junior officer do something that required explanation, but didn't yet have an explanation that made sense. Lieutenant Vanson. He stopped 3 feet away from her, his body language formal. That was 83 seconds for drill completion. The previous record was 2 minutes 17 seconds. He paused, and the pause stretched long enough that it became clear he was choosing his next words carefully. Where did you train? Fort Benning, sir. Then Camp Lejeune for advanced weapons qualifications. Kira's voice maintained the same steady tone she'd used throughout the morning. After that, assignment here for armory duty. Thatcher's eyes narrowed slightly. Advanced weapons qualifications at Lejeune. What was your final score? Expert marksman across all platforms, sir. Top of class for precision rifle. The commander's jaw worked like he was chewing on information that didn't quite fit with what he'd expected to hear. Your personnel file indicates you're in weapons maintenance. There's no mention of operational shooting experience. I maintain the weapons, sir. Part of that maintenance includes test firing to confirm zero and function. Kira shifted the rifle slightly, a minimal adjustment that brought it into a more comfortable carry position. I've test-fired most of the rifles in the armory inventory over the past 8 months. Walcott had descended from the observation deck. He approached with the stride of someone who'd decided something needed to be addressed immediately. He stopped beside Thatcher, his attention fixed on Kira with an intensity that suggested he was re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about the personnel assigned to his base. Lieutenant, I watched you work that bolt gun like you'd been shooting it for years. The MK-13 isn't a weapon most people pick up and run a time with. I'm familiar with the platform, Chief. Kira met his eyes directly. The trigger breaks clean at 3.5 pounds. The stock length is set for someone with longer arms, so I adjusted my position to compensate. The scope's zeroed for someone who prefers a 2.7 mil hold at 600 meters, but the actual zero is solid, so I just calculated from that baseline. The silence that followed her response was different from the silence that had preceded the drill. This one carried weight, the kind that came from operators realizing they'd made assumptions about capability based on assignment rather than actual skill. Behind Walcott, Mitchell stood with his arms crossed, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like embarrassment mixed with grudging respect. General Bridger had made his way down from the observation deck. He walked with the measured pace of someone who'd spent 40 years in uniform and learned to project authority without having to assert it verbally. He stopped a respectful distance from the group forming around Kira, but his presence immediately shifted everyone's attention. "Commander Thatcher, I'd like a word with the lieutenant." Thatcher stepped aside, his clipboard lowering to his side. "Yes, sir." He gestured toward Kira. "Lieutenant Vanson is available for your questions, General." Bridger studied Kira for a long moment. His eyes moved from the rifle she carried to her hands, noting the calluses that came from hard work, then to her face where he searched for something that would explain what he'd just witnessed. "Lieutenant, I've been observing SEAL training operations for 15 years. I've watched some of the finest shooters in the world run that drill." His voice was measured, each word deliberate. "I've never seen anyone complete it in under 2 minutes. You finished in 83 seconds with a bolt-action rifle." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "How?" "Training and repetition, sir." Kira's response was direct, no false modesty, but no arrogance either. "The shot sequence was straightforward once I confirmed the target layout. The time pressure was significant, but manageable with proper movement efficiency between positions." General Cortland had joined Bridger, and behind him, General Fenwick approached with his phone now being used to take notes rather than make calls. Cortland spoke with the tone of someone asking a technical question that genuinely interested him. "The 1,800-meter shot. That's beyond the effective range most operators train for. What was your wind call?" 5 miles per hour from 270 degrees, gusting to 8. Kira's answer came without hesitation. "I waited for a lull in the gusts and took the shot during a 3-second window where the flag showed consistent flow. Elevation was 42 mils. Windage was 6 mils, right to compensate for drift." Fenwick looked up from his phone. His expression had transformed from the prepared disappointment of an hour ago to something approaching fascination. "Lieutenant, are you telling me you calculated all of that in under 20 seconds? "The fundamentals don't change with time pressure, sir." Kira shifted her stance slightly, a minimal adjustment that suggested standing at attention while having a conversation was something she could maintain indefinitely. The scope's reticule provides the tools. The shooter just has to read conditions and apply the solution. Landry had moved close enough to hear the conversation. He stood at the edge of the group, his face showing the careful neutrality of someone who'd lost a bet and was still processing the implications. Torres joined him, the two men exchanging a glance that carried an entire conversation without words being spoken. Rourke broke away from a group of snipers who'd been conferring near the range equipment. He approached with the stride of someone who'd decided direct questions were needed. "Lieutenant, that MK-13 you used, that's my rifle." He said it without accusation, just statement of fact. "I zeroed it 3 days ago for a deployment workup. You shot like you've been using that exact weapon for months. Good maintenance keeps a zero stable, petty officer." Kira's response acknowledged his concern without backing away from it. "I test-fired that rifle last week during routine armory checks. 50 rounds to confirm function and accuracy. The weapon performs exactly as designed." Thatcher's clipboard came back up, but he wasn't writing on it. He was holding it like a man who needed something to do with his hands while his brain caught up with events. "Lieutenant Vanson, I'm going to need a full briefing on your training background." He glanced at the 3 generals, then back to Kira. "It appears your personnel file is incomplete regarding your capabilities. I'll provide whatever information is required, sir." Kira's posture remained at ease, comfortable but professional. "My training records should be in my service jacket." Walcott cleared his throat, drawing attention. "Commander, with respect, I think we need to reconsider the lieutenant's current assignment. Having someone with this level of capability in the armory is a misuse of resources." Bridger raised a hand, a minimal gesture that nevertheless commanded immediate silence. "Before we discuss reassignment, I'd like to understand something." He focused completely on Kira, his expression showing the intensity of someone who'd identified a critical question. "Lieutenant, you've been at Coronado for 8 months. You've been maintaining weapons and presumably watching operators train. Why didn't you mention your capability before now?" "Nobody asked, sir." Kira's response was simple, direct, and somehow that made it more powerful than any elaborate explanation could have been. I was assigned to weapons maintenance. I maintained the weapons. The debriefing room in the Tactical Operations Center smelled like coffee and the particular staleness that came from air conditioning running constantly in a building that had seen decades of military operations. Kira sat in a chair that faced a table where Thatcher, Walcott, and the three generals had arranged themselves in a semicircle that suggested this was both a formal inquiry and something less structured. A laptop sat open on the table, her personnel file displayed on the screen where everyone could see the information that had apparently failed to communicate something important. General Fenwick had taken the lead in the questioning. He sat with a tablet in front of him, notes accumulating as the conversation progressed. Your service record shows assignment to weapons maintenance upon arrival at Coronado. Prior to that, you completed advanced marksmanship training at Camp Lejeune, where you qualified expert across multiple platforms. He looked up from the tablet, his eyes searching her face for something that would explain the disconnect. Your instructors at Lejeune rated you in the top 5% of your class. That's not just competent, Lieutenant. That's exceptional. Why wasn't this capability flagged for operational consideration? The needs of the Navy, sir. Kira kept her hands folded in her lap, her posture relaxed but attentive. When I received orders for Coronado, the position available was in the armory. I reported as assigned. Bridger leaned forward slightly, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light. The position available was in the armory because that's what your detailer assigned based on the information in your file. He gestured toward the laptop screen. What I'm not seeing here is anything that would indicate you have the capability to outshoot SEAL snipers who've been in combat. Where did that come from? My father was Marine Corps, sir. Force reconnaissance. He taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. Kira's voice carried the same steady tone she'd maintained throughout the morning. By the time I was 12, I was competing in long-range rifle competitions. Junior division at first, then open division when I aged up. I won the National High-Power Rifle Championship 3 years running. The room went quiet. Torres, who'd been standing near the door, shifted his weight and exchanged a glance with Landry that suggested they both knew exactly what winning that championship required. Mitchell, leaning against the wall near the windows, straightened slightly as the information registered. Cortland set down a coffee cup he'd been holding. The national championship. He repeated it like he was testing whether the words made sense together with what he'd witnessed on the range. That 1,000-yard competition with some of the finest civilian and military shooters in the country. You're telling me you won that 3 times before you even enlisted? Yes, sir. 16, 17, and 18 years old. Kira met his eyes directly. After I graduated high school, I enlisted and went through basic, then advanced training, then Lejeune for marksmanship qualification. Then here. Thatcher had his own tablet out now, searching for something. The National High-Power Championship keeps records. He was quiet for a moment, scrolling through information. Then his expression changed. Catherine Vanson. 3 consecutive wins in the junior to transition period. Competition scores that would be competitive in Olympic-level shooting. He looked up from the tablet. Why isn't any of this in your service record? I was asked about competitive shooting experience during my entrance interview, sir. I disclosed all of it. Kira's response carried no defensiveness, just a statement of fact. I assumed it was entered into my record. If it wasn't, that's an administrative oversight I wasn't aware of. Walcott stood from the table and walked to the windows that overlooked the range. He stood there for a long moment, his back to the room, then turned around with an expression that suggested he was still processing implications. Lieutenant, you've been maintaining our rifles for 8 months. You've had access to every weapon system we use. You've fired them, cleaned them, zeroed them for other shooters. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Did you know you could outshoot the operators assigned to those weapons? I knew I could shoot well, Chief. Whether that translated to being better than operators with combat experience wasn't something I could determine without a direct comparison. Kira shifted slightly in her chair. This morning provided that comparison. General Fenwick made a note on his tablet, then looked up. Let me ask this directly, Lieutenant. If we'd known about your capability 8 months ago, What assignment would have been appropriate? That's not my decision, sir. Kira's response was immediate. I'm a lieutenant. I go where I'm ordered. If command had decided I belonged in an operational role, I would have served there. They decided I belonged in the armory, so that's where I served. Bridger smiled slightly, an expression that suggested he'd heard similar responses from officers who understood how the chain of command worked, but was still impressed by the attitude behind it. You've made your point, Lieutenant. He leaned back in his chair, his demeanor shifting from interrogation mode to something more conversational. Now let me ask you something else. When Commander Thatcher laughed at your request this morning, what were you thinking? That I wanted to attempt the drill, sir. Kira's answer was simple. The commander's reaction wasn't relevant to whether I should make the attempt. You weren't angry? Cortland asked the question with genuine curiosity. You weren't motivated to prove something? I was motivated to shoot the drill, sir. Anger would have interfered with that goal. Kira glanced toward the window where the range was visible in the distance. Proving something to others wasn't the objective. Completing the drill was the objective. Thatcher set his tablet down on the table with more force than was strictly necessary. The sound drew everyone's attention. Lieutenant Vanson, I need to apologize. I made assumptions about your capability based on your current assignment and the fact that you requested to run a drill designed for special operations personnel. Those assumptions were wrong. He met her eyes directly. The laughter was inappropriate and unprofessional. You deserve better than that. The apology hung in the air for a moment. Kira nodded once, acknowledging it without making it larger than it needed to be. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Fenwick closed his tablet and set aside. Commander, I think we need to discuss reassignment options for Lieutenant Vanson. Having someone with Olympic-level shooting capability, maintaining rifles, is the definition of underutilized talent. With respect, General, I'd like to finish this conversation first. Walcott had moved back to the table. He addressed Kira directly. Lieutenant, this morning you picked the MK-13 for the drill. That's Petty Officer Rourke's personal weapon. You could have chosen any rifle in the armory, including the M4 platforms that would have been easier to run the drill with. Why'd you pick a bolt gun? Because it was the right tool for the targets at extreme range. Chief, Kira's response suggested she'd given this considerable thought. The M4 is excellent for rapid engagement at close to medium distances. But the general targets were at 1,200 and 1,800 meters. At that range, I wanted the accuracy and consistency of a precision bolt gun. The time constraint was challenging, but manageable. Torres spoke up from his position near the door. Lieutenant, you said you calculated wind and elevation for the 1,800-meter shot in under 20 seconds. Most of our snipers take 2 to 3 minutes for that same calculation at that distance. How'd you do it that fast? Practice, Petty Officer. Kira turned slightly to address him directly. I've been shooting long range since I was a child. After thousands of shots at varying distances in different conditions, the calculations become automatic. You're not doing math anymore. You're reading the environment, and your body responds with the correct solution. Mitchell pushed away from the wall. That's what the best shooters say, that it becomes instinct. He looked at the officers at the table. We've got operators who train for years to reach that level. She's saying she's been doing it since she was 8 years old. Bridger stood, and everyone's attention shifted to him. The conversation had gone on long enough that decisions needed to be made. Lieutenant Vanson, you're going to be reassigned. That much is certain. He glanced at Thatcher and Walcott. What that reassignment looks like is going to require some discussion among the command staff. For now, you're released from this debrief. Return to your current duties until further notice. Kira stood, her movement bringing her to attention without making it obvious. Yes, sir. She moved toward the door, but Bridger's voice stopped her before she reached it. Lieutenant, one more question. She turned back to face him. If we'd asked you 8 months ago if you could outshoot the SEALs on this base, what would you have said? Kira considered the question for a moment before answering. I would have said I didn't know, sir, but I would have been willing to find out. The armory was exactly as Kira had left it 3 hours earlier. Rifles lined the walls in their designated racks, organized by platform and serial number. The cleaning stations stood ready with solvents and brushes arranged in the precise order she maintained them. The logbook sat open on the desk, where she'd been documenting maintenance cycles when Thatcher had arrived for the morning briefing that had somehow turned into something much larger. She picked up where she'd left off, pulling the next rifle from the maintenance queue. AMK-18, serial number ending in 4792, assigned to a SEAL named Peterson who'd reported a feeding issue during his last training evolution. She began the disassembly with the automatic movements that came from doing this work hundreds of times, her hands knowing the sequence without conscious thought. The door opened 15 minutes later. Rourke stepped inside, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who wasn't sure what kind of reception he'd receive. He stopped a few feet inside the doorway, his eyes moving from Kira to the disassembled rifle on the workbench, then back to her face. "Lieutenant." His voice carried a weight that suggested this conversation was going to cover territory that neither of them had mapped out yet. "Petty Officer Rourke." Kira continued working on the rifle, inspecting the bolt carrier group for wear. "What can I do for you?" "You used my rifle this morning." Rourke moved closer to the workbench. He didn't sit, but his posture relaxed slightly. "That MK-13, I've been shooting for 2 years. You picked it up cold and put rounds through it like you'd been zeroing it yourself. Good weapon. Well maintained." Kira set down the bolt carrier and met his eyes. The zero was solid. Made the job easier. Rourke was quiet for a moment, processing that response. "Torres and I have been talking." He shifted his weight, a minimal movement that suggested discomfort with what he was about to say. "We've been watching you work in here for months. You're quiet, professional, do good work on the weapons. We figured you were just admin, someone who understood maintenance, but wasn't operational." That was a reasonable assumption. Kira returned her attention to the rifle, examining the magazine well for burrs. "I am admin. My assignment is maintenance. But you're not just admin." Rourke's voice carried the edge of someone trying to reconcile conflicting information. "You're a national champion shooter who's been sitting in this armory for 8 months while operators like me have been running drills you could probably teach." "I don't have instructor qualifications, petty officer." Kira's response was matter of fact, and teaching wasn't my assignment. Maintaining the weapons was my assignment. The door opened again. Torres entered, followed by Mitchell and 3 other SEALs whose names Kira knew from equipment logs, but who'd never had reason to speak with her directly. They arranged themselves around the armory with the casual positioning of people who decided this conversation needed to happen but weren't entirely sure how to start it. Torres spoke first. His voice carried less of the skepticism that had marked his comments on the observation deck. "Lieutenant, we owe you an apology. The betting this morning. The comments about you failing the drill. That was unprofessional. You were making predictions based on available information." Kira continued her inspection of the MK-18. "The information available to you suggested I wouldn't complete the drill. Your predictions were logical given what you knew. But we should have asked." Mitchell moved closer to the workbench. "You've been handling our weapons for 8 months. We should have asked about your background instead of assuming." Kira set down the rifle components and turned to face the group. Her posture remained relaxed, but her attention was fully on them. "Would you have believed me if I told you I could outshoot most of the operators on this base?" The question hung in the air. Torres and Rourke exchanged glances. Mitchell looked at the floor for a moment before meeting her eyes. "Probably not." He said it quietly, not without seeing it. Then this morning served a useful purpose. Kira picked up a cleaning patch and began running it through the rifle's barrel. "Now you know what I can do. That information is available for whatever use command decides to make of it." One of the other SEALs, a younger operator named Garrett, spoke up. His voice carried genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "Lieutenant, how many rounds do you think you've fired in your life?" Kira paused, considering the question. "Competitive shooting from age 8 to 18. That was probably 100,000 rounds over 10 years. Military training added another 20,000. Since arriving at Coronado, test firing and function checks probably added another 15,000. She looked at Garrett directly. "Call it 135,000 rounds. Give or take 10,000. The number settled over the group like a physical weight. Rourke whistled quietly. "That's more trigger time than most snipers get in a 20-year career." My father believed in practice. Kira returned to cleaning the barrel. He used to say that talent was just the starting point. Competence came from repetition. Excellence came from repetition under pressure. Torres leaned against one of the rifle racks, his arms crossed, but his posture more open than it had been earlier. Your father was force recon. Did he teach you the way they train their shooters? He taught me the way his father taught him. Kira pulled the cleaning patch through and inspected it. My grandfather was a Marine Scout sniper in Vietnam. He taught my father. My father taught me. It's a family tradition. Mitchell pulled up a chair and sat down, his earlier discomfort replaced by interest. What was the hardest shot you ever made? 2,000 meters on a moving target. Kira began reassembling the rifle, her hands moving through the sequence automatically. Wind was gusting between 10 and 15 miles per hour from multiple directions. I was 16. Took me 3 attempts to get the read right. The group went quiet. Even Torres, who'd been watching with professional skepticism, looked impressed. That's beyond what most military snipers train for. 2,000 meters is extreme range, even for special operations. My father's philosophy was to train at distances beyond what you'd ever need. That way, when you had to make a difficult shot under pressure, it felt routine. Kira inserted the bolt carrier group and locked it into place. The Mk-18 was coming back together with the smooth efficiency that came from expert hands. He used to take me to ranges where we'd shoot at distances that seemed impossible. Then we'd practice at those distances until they weren't impossible anymore. Garrett moved closer to the workbench. Can I ask you something personal, Lieutenant? Go ahead. Why the Navy? If you're that good a shooter, why not Marine Corps like your father? Or Army Sniper School? Because the Marine Corps was my father's path. Kira tested the trigger on the reassembled rifle, confirming smooth operation. I wanted my own path. The Navy offered opportunities that interested me. The fact that it led to an armory assignment wasn't what I expected, but it's been useful experience. Useful how? Torres asked the question with genuine curiosity. I've maintained every weapon system the SEALs use. I know their quirks, their strengths, their limitations. Kira set the rifle down and began documenting the maintenance in the logbook. When I eventually move to an operational role, that knowledge will be valuable. Understanding the weapons isn't just about shooting them well. It's about knowing what they can do, what they can't do, and how to maximize their effectiveness. Rourke straightened from where he'd been leaning. When you move to an operational role, not if. General Bridger made it clear reassignment was coming. Kira finished her log entry. I don't know what form that will take, but remaining in the armory seems unlikely after this morning. The door opened once more. Walcott entered, his presence immediately commanding attention. He looked at the assembled SEALs, then at Kira. Lieutenant Vanson, the command staff has reached a decision regarding your reassignment. We need you in the briefing room. The SEALs shifted, making space for Kira to leave the workbench. She secured the maintenance area with practiced efficiency, logging off the computer and ensuring all tools were properly stored. As she moved toward the door, Torres spoke again. Lieutenant. She turned to face him. For what it's worth, that was the most impressive shooting I've ever seen. And I've been doing this for 10 years. Kira nodded once, acknowledging the comment without making it larger than it needed to be. Thank you, Petty Officer. She followed Walcott out of the armory, leaving the group of SEALs to process what they'd learned about the person who'd been maintaining their weapons while they'd been assuming she was just another admin assignment. Mitchell broke the silence first. We've been training beside a national champion for 8 months and never knew it. Garrett shook his head slowly. Not just beside her. We've been dismissing her as someone who couldn't hang with us. And she's probably better than any shooter on this base. Rourke moved to the workbench where Kira had been working. The Mk-18 sat there, fully reassembled and ready to return to service. He picked it up, checking her work with the practiced eye of someone who knew what proper maintenance looked like. Everything she touches, she does perfectly. The weapons, the shooting, the way she handles herself. He set the rifle down carefully. We completely missed who she was. Torres moved toward the door. Command's gonna put her somewhere operational. That's obvious. The question is where. Wherever it is, Mitchell said quietly, They'd better make sure she's actually using her capability this time. Wasting someone like that in an armory for 8 months was criminal. The briefing room had been rearranged since the morning debrief. The table now faced a large screen displaying what looked like operational planning documents. Thatcher stood at the front of the room beside a podium. Walcott had taken a position near the door. The 3 generals sat in chairs arranged to face the screen, their body language suggesting this briefing carried weight beyond a simple reassignment notification. Kira entered and moved to the position Walcott indicated, standing at attention in front of the assembled officers. The door closed behind her with a solid click that seemed louder than it should have been in the quiet room. Thatcher spoke first. His voice had lost the skepticism that had colored it during the morning's events. Lieutenant Vanson, the command staff has reviewed your performance this morning along with your complete training record, which we obtained from Camp Lejeune approximately an hour ago. He gestured toward the screen where her scores from various qualifications were displayed in columns that told a story of consistent excellence. What we found confirms what you demonstrated on the range. You're an exceptional shooter with capabilities that exceed most special operations personnel. The screen changed to show a different document. Organizational charts and unit designations that Kira recognized as operational rather than administrative. General Bridger stood and moved to the screen, using a laser pointer to highlight specific sections. We have several options for your reassignment, Lieutenant. The first would place you with a SEAL training cadre as a marksmanship instructor. Your capabilities would directly improve the shooting skills of operators going through advanced training. General Cortland leaned forward in his chair. The second option would assign you to a sniper team, where you'd work directly with special operations on deployments. Your skills would be utilized in the field rather than in a training environment. General Fenwick was the one who presented the third option. His voice carried a different weight, suggesting this was the option that had generated the most discussion among the command staff. The third possibility is more unusual, Lieutenant. We have a program that places highly skilled personnel in specialized roles that don't fit traditional organizational structures. These roles often involve working independently or in very small teams on assignments that require capabilities beyond standard operating procedures. The room went quiet, waiting for her response. Kira considered each option carefully before speaking. May I ask questions about each assignment, sir? Of course. Bridger gestured for her to proceed. The instructor role. Kira focused on the general. Would that be exclusively classroom and range instruction, or would it include operational deployment with training units? Primarily classroom and range. Thatcher answered before Bridger could respond. You'd be preparing operators for deployment, but you wouldn't deploy with them. Your value would be in passing your skills to others. The sniper team assignment. Kira shifted her attention to Cortland. Would I be assigned to an existing team, or would a new team be formed around my capabilities? Existing team. Cortland's answer was immediate. You'd integrate with a SEAL sniper element that's currently preparing for deployment. They're experienced operators who would benefit from your skill set. And the specialized role. Kira looked at Fenwick. Can you provide more detail about what that would involve? Fenwick stood and moved closer to where she stood. Not in this setting, Lieutenant. That program requires additional clearances and briefings that we can't conduct here. What I can tell you is that it would put you in situations where your unique capabilities would be fully utilized, often under conditions that most shooters would consider impossible. Thatcher cleared his throat. Lieutenant, before you make a decision, I need to say something. He moved from behind the podium, his posture less formal than it had been. This morning, I underestimated you based on assumptions that had no basis in fact. That was my failure as a commander. These options we're presenting represent our attempt to correct that failure by ensuring you're placed where your capabilities can be properly utilized. Kira nodded once, acknowledging the statement. I understand, sir. Walcott spoke from his position near the door. Lieutenant, all 3 options represent significant opportunities. The question is which one aligns with what you want to do with your career. What I want is to serve where I can be most effective. Kira's response was immediate and certain. The instructor role would allow me to multiply my capabilities by teaching others. The sniper team would put me in operational situations where I could contribute directly. The specialized role sounds like it would challenge me in ways the other options wouldn't. Bridger returned to his seat. That's a professional answer, Lieutenant. But I'm asking you personally. Which role appeals to you? Kira took a moment before responding, her eyes moving from one officer to another. The specialized role. If I'm being honest, I didn't join the Navy to teach in a classroom or to integrate into an existing team structure. I joined to do things that would push me beyond what I already know I can do, even if that means working alone or in situations that are more dangerous than standard operations. Fenwick's question carried the weight of someone who wanted to be certain she understood what she was volunteering for. Especially then, sir. Kira's voice remained steady. I've been shooting competitively since I was 8 years old. I've trained under pressure my entire life. What I haven't done is operate in environments where the stakes are real and the margin for error is zero. That's the experience I'm looking for. Cortland exchanged a glance with Bridger and Fenwick. The three generals seemed to have a conversation without words, some decision being reached through expressions and subtle nods. Bridger spoke for the group. Lieutenant Vanson, we're going to recommend you for the specialized program. However, that recommendation requires approval from higher command and a series of evaluations that will test not just your shooting, but your ability to operate independently under extreme pressure. How long does that process take? Kira asked the question with the tone of someone already preparing to begin. 3 weeks of assessment and clearance procedures. Fenwick answered. You'll remain at Coronado during that period, but your duties will shift from armory work to evaluation exercises. Some of those exercises will be physical. Some will be psychological. All of them will be designed to determine if you can handle the demands of the program. Thatcher moved back to the podium and pulled up a new document on the screen. Starting tomorrow, you'll report to a different section of the base for your evaluation. Chief Walcott will be your primary point of contact during this period. You'll maintain your current quarters and your current rank, but your daily activities will be focused entirely on the assessment process. Understood, sir. Kira's posture remained at attention, but something in her expression suggested eagerness rather than apprehension. Walcott opened the door, signaling the briefing was concluding. Lieutenant, you're dismissed for the rest of the day. Use the time to prepare mentally for what's coming. The evaluations start at 0600 tomorrow. Don't be late. Kira moved toward the door, but General Bridger's voice stopped her one more time. Lieutenant. She turned back to face him. This morning you proved you can shoot better than almost anyone in this command. The next 3 weeks are going to prove whether you can do everything else that matters. Shooting is just the foundation. What we're testing now is whether you can build on that foundation under conditions that will break most people. I'm ready, sir. Kira said it without hesitation or false bravado. Just a statement of fact from someone who'd been preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity her entire life. The door closed behind her. The command staff remained in the briefing room, and Thatcher was the first to speak. That's either the most confident lieutenant I've ever met or someone who doesn't understand what she's volunteering for. Fenwick shook his head slowly. She understands. You can see in how she carries herself. She's been waiting for someone to give her a challenge that matches her capability. We just handed her exactly what she wanted. Cortland stood and moved to the window overlooking the base. The question is whether she can handle the reality of it. Shooting targets on a range is very different from operating in the field where mistakes cost lives. Bridger remained seated, his expression thoughtful. She said something this morning that stuck with me. When I asked if she was angry about being underestimated, she said anger would have interfered with her objective. That's the mindset of someone who can separate emotion from performance. That's what we need in the specialized program. Walcott moved from the door to join the group. I'll oversee her evaluation personally. If she's as capable as this morning suggested, she'll be fine. If she's not, we'll know within the first week. Thatcher pulled up another document on the screen, this one showing evaluation protocols and testing schedules. 3 weeks to determine if a national champion shooter can become something more. He looked at the assembled officers. I'm betting she makes it through. Fenwick smiled slightly. Commander, after this morning, I'm not taking any bets against Lieutenant Vanson. She's already proven that underestimating her is a mistake. The evaluations are just going to confirm what we already know. The evaluation compound sat in a section of Coronado that Kira had never accessed during her 8 months at the base. High fences marked the perimeter. Security checkpoints controlled access. The buildings inside looked like standard military construction from the outside, but the lack of windows and the reinforced doors suggested whatever happened inside wasn't meant to be visible to casual observers. Walcott met her at the main gate at 5:45. His expression was neutral, professional, giving nothing away about what the next 3 weeks would hold. Lieutenant Vanson. He gestured for her to follow him through the checkpoint. Welcome to assessment and selection. Most people who enter this compound don't make it through the first week. Let's see if you're different. They walked through corridors that smelled like fresh paint and disinfectant. Other personnel moved through the compound with purpose, their faces showing the focus of people engaged in serious work. Walcott led her to a briefing room where a dozen instructors waited, each wearing expressions that suggested they'd seen hundreds of candidates attempt what she was about to face. The lead instructor was a woman in her 40s named Commander Sarah Vega. Her uniform showed the ribbon rack of someone who'd spent decades in special operations. She stood at the front of the room with the bearing of someone who'd earned every piece of authority she held. Lieutenant Vanson. Her voice carried across the room with clarity that demanded attention. You're here because 3 generals think you might have what we need. My job for the next 3 weeks is to determine if they're right. The shooting you demonstrated yesterday was impressive. It also represents about 10% of what this program requires. The screen behind Vega displayed a schedule broken into phases. Week 1 is physical and mental baseline assessment. You'll complete endurance tests, strength evaluations, and psychological screening. Week 2 is operational skills assessment. Navigation, communications, tactical planning, field craft. Week 3 is integration testing, where we combine everything and see if you can perform under conditions that simulate actual operations. One of the other instructors, a man whose name tag read Patterson, stepped forward. During these 3 weeks, you'll be evaluated constantly. Every conversation is an assessment. Every meal is an assessment. How you handle success and how you handle failure both matter. We're not looking for perfect performance. We're looking for people who can maintain effectiveness when everything goes wrong. Kira stood at attention, absorbing the information without reaction. Her face showed focus but not anxiety. Understood, sir. Vega moved closer, studying Kira's expression like she was reading a technical manual. You're calm right now. That's good. But calm at the beginning means nothing. Everyone starts calm. The question is whether you stay functional when you've been awake for 36 hours and you still have critical decisions to make. The door opened and Torres entered, followed by Rourke. Both men wore instructor badges that Kira hadn't seen them display before. Torres caught her eye, and his expression flickered with something that might have been apology or acknowledgement. He moved to stand with the other instructors, his presence making it clear that the SEALs who'd watched her shoot yesterday would now be evaluating her on everything else. Vega continued the briefing. Your first test begins in 30 minutes. You'll complete a 12-mile ruck march with 50 pounds of gear. Time standard is 3 hours. Most candidates finish between 2:45 and 3:15. After the march, you'll have 1 hour to recover before your first navigation exercise. She paused, letting the schedule sink in. Questions? One question, ma'am. Kira met Vega's eyes directly. Are the other instructors here aware of my background? They know you're a competitive shooter with advanced marksmanship skills. Vega's response was immediate. They don't know about yesterday's drill performance unless they were present for it. As far as this assessment is concerned, you're starting from zero. Your shooting means nothing if you can't do everything else we require. Patterson handed Kira a gear list and a map. Your route for the ruck march is marked. You'll navigate independently. Checkpoints are indicated but not staffed. You'll confirm passage by photographing markers at each point. Deviation from the route results in time penalties. Failure to complete within the time standard results in evaluation termination. Termination meaning removal from the program? Kira asked the question calmly, seeking clarification rather than challenging. Termination meaning you return to standard duty assignment and the specialized program closes to you permanently. Patterson's answer left no ambiguity. We don't offer second chances here, Lieutenant. You get one opportunity to prove you belong. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Walcott, who'd been standing near the door, spoke for the first time since entering. Lieutenant, you still have the option to withdraw and accept one of the other assignment offers. The instructor role is still available. The sniper team would still take you. This assessment is voluntary. Kira turned to face him. I'm not withdrawing, Chief. I'm here to complete the assessment. Vega smiled slightly, an expression that suggested approval mixed with anticipation of watching someone face reality. Good answer. Now let's see if you can back it up. She gestured toward the door. Gear issue is in the next building. You have 25 minutes to kit up and be at the start point. Move. The gear issue room contained rows of equipment organized by size and function. A supplies sergeant handed Kira a rucksack, boots, uniform, and the 50 pounds of weight that would accompany her on the march. The weight came in the form of sandbags marked with serial numbers, presumably so instructors could verify she didn't lighten her load during the exercise. Torres appeared in the doorway as she was checking the ruck straps. His voice was quieter than it had been during the briefing. Lieutenant, can I give you some advice? Of course, petty officer. The first week breaks most people. He moved closer, keeping his voice low enough that others in the room wouldn't overhear. Not because the physical tests are impossible. They're hard but manageable. People break because they start doubting themselves. They start thinking about failure instead of focusing on the next step. I appreciate the advice. Kira adjusted the ruck's hip belt, testing the weight distribution. Is there something specific I should be prepared for? Torres hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The instructors are going to push you in ways that have nothing to do with physical capability. They're going to question your decisions. They're going to create scenarios where there's no right answer. The people who make it through are the ones who can take that pressure and keep functioning anyway. Like shooting under time pressure. Kira met his eyes. The fundamentals don't change just because the conditions are difficult. Exactly like that. Torres stepped back. Good luck, Lieutenant. For what it's worth, I think you're going to surprise people again. The start point for the ruck march was marked with orange flags at the edge of the compound. Vega waited there with a stopwatch and a clipboard. 6 other candidates stood in a line, each wearing similar gear, each showing the focus of people about to endure something deliberately difficult. They ranged in age from early 20s to late 30s. Their uniforms showed they came from different branches and specialties. None of them showed recognition of Kira, which suggested her performance yesterday hadn't spread beyond the SEAL community yet. Vega addressed the group with the efficiency of someone who'd given this speech hundreds of times. The route is 12 miles through varied terrain. You'll encounter hills, sand, and 1 water crossing. Checkpoints are marked on your maps. Photograph each marker to confirm passage. Time standard is 3 hours. Medical support is available at checkpoints 2 and 4 if you need to withdraw. Any questions? None of the candidates spoke. The silence suggested they'd all been briefed extensively before arriving at the start point and knew that questions at this stage were just delays. Kira checked her gear one final time, confirming the ruck was properly secured and her boots were laced for the distance ahead. Vega raised her hand. On my mark, you'll begin. She looked at each candidate individually, her expression giving nothing away about what she expected to see. Execute. 7 candidates began moving simultaneously, each finding their pace within the first 100 meters. Kira settled into a rhythm that her body knew from thousands of training miles. The weight of the ruck distributed properly across her hips and shoulders. The route ahead stretched into terrain that looked deceptively simple from the start point, but would reveal its challenges as the miles accumulated. Behind her at the start point, Vega made notes on her clipboard. Patterson joined her, watching the candidates disappear into the distance. What do you think about Vanson? Vega didn't look up from her notes. She's calm, prepared, moves like someone who's done physical training before. But that describes half the people who fail out in week 1. The real test isn't physical capability. It's what happens when she hits the point where her body wants to quit and her mind has to force it to continue. You heard about her range performance yesterday? Patterson kept his eyes on the candidates. I heard she completed the advanced sweep drill in 83 seconds with a bolt gun. Vega's response was measured. Impressive, but shooting is a discrete skill. This program requires integration of dozens of skills under sustained pressure. We'll know in 3 weeks whether she has what we need. The 12 miles passed in stages that tested different aspects of endurance. The first 3 miles were relatively flat, allowing candidates to find their rhythm and settle into the march. Kira moved at a steady pace that kept her in the middle of the group, not pushing to lead, but not falling behind either. The ruck's weight pressed against her shoulders and hips with the familiar discomfort that came from carrying heavy loads over distance. Checkpoint 1 appeared at mile 3, marked with a reflective sign mounted on a post. Kira photographed it with her phone as instructed and continued without stopping. 2 of the other candidates paused to adjust their gear. One was already showing signs of struggle, his pace slowing as the weight accumulated against joints and muscles that weren't quite prepared for sustained effort. Miles 4 through 7 introduced hills. Not mountains, but sustained climbs that force heart rates up and breathing patterns to adjust. The candidate who'd been struggling at checkpoint 1 fell behind, his form deteriorating as fatigue set in. Another candidate, a man who'd been setting a blistering pace at the start, began to slow as his early speed cost him energy he'd need later. Kira maintained her rhythm, her breathing controlled, her steps deliberate. The hills were challenging but manageable. She'd done similar training with her father in terrain that was far less forgiving than the groomed paths of Coronado. The memories of those training sessions played in her mind like a soundtrack, her father's voice calling out corrections and encouragement as they covered miles together before sunrise. Checkpoint 2 came at mile 7. A medical station was set up there with 2 corpsmen waiting to evaluate anyone who needed assistance or wanted to withdraw. The candidate who'd been struggling since checkpoint 1 arrived and immediately moved toward the medical tent. His march was over. One of the 7 had already reached their limit. Kira photographed the checkpoint marker and kept moving. The corpsmen watched her pass without comment, making notes on their clipboards. She was still in the middle of the pack, 3 candidates ahead of her and 2 behind, with 1 now out of the assessment entirely. The water crossing came at mile 9, a stream that was maybe 30 feet wide and waist deep, with a current strong enough to require attention, but not strong enough to prevent crossing. The candidates ahead of Kira had already begun their crossing by the time she arrived. One woman was moving carefully, testing each step before committing her weight. One man was pushing through with determination, accepting the current's push and adjusting his balance accordingly. Kira entered the water without hesitation. The cold shocked her system, but she'd expected it and controlled her breathing to prevent gasping. The ruck's weight shifted as water saturated her uniform and the current pushed against her legs. She moved with deliberate steps, planting each foot firmly before lifting the other, maintaining 3 points of contact with the stream bed at all times. The crossing took 90 seconds. She emerged on the far side with water streaming from her gear and continued the march without pausing to adjust equipment. Behind her, one of the remaining candidates hesitated at the water's edge. His hesitation cost him time and momentum. By the time he entered the water, Kira had already covered another 100 meters of the route. Miles 10 through 12 were the finishing stretch, flat terrain that should have been easy except that it came after 9 miles of accumulated fatigue. This was where mental strength mattered more than physical capability. Bodies wanted to slow down. Minds had to force them to maintain pace. Kira felt the fatigue in her legs and shoulders, but recognized it as the normal cost of hard physical work rather than approaching failure. Checkpoint 3 appeared at mile 11. Kira photographed it and checked her watch. 2 hours, 27 minutes elapsed. She had 33 minutes to cover the final mile and finish under the time standard. The math was comfortable. Even with fatigue, she could maintain pace to finish with time to spare. The final mile revealed itself as mostly straight, with a gradual incline at the end. Kira could see the finish point marked with the same orange flags that had marked the start. 2 candidates had already finished and were being evaluated by instructors near the flags. She pushed her pace slightly, not sprinting, but increasing her tempo enough to close the distance efficiently. She crossed the finish line at 2 hours, 41 minutes. Vega was waiting there with her stopwatch and clipboard. Lieutenant Vanson, 2 hours, 41 minutes. Well within standard. She made a note on the clipboard. Report to the recovery area. You have 55 minutes before your next evolution. Use them wisely. The recovery area was a covered pavilion with benches and water stations. The 2 candidates who'd finished before Kira were already there, removing wet gear and beginning the process of preparing for whatever came next. Kira joined them, stripping off the wet uniform top and reaching for dry clothing from her kit bag. One of the other candidates, a woman whose name tag read Martinez, looked over at her. That water crossing was brutal. I thought for sure I was going to lose my footing in the current. Training pays off. Kira pulled on a dry shirt. The key is moving deliberately rather than quickly. You look like you'd done it 100 times before. Martinez sat down to work on her boots, checking for hot spots that might become blisters. Where'd you train? California backcountry with my father. Kira began the same boot check, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. We do long ruck marches through terrain a lot worse than this. He believed in making training harder than operations, so operations felt routine. Smart philosophy. The third candidate who'd finished, a man named Diaz, joined the conversation. My old unit used to do something similar. Make everything in training deliberately difficult so the real work felt manageable. Torres appeared at the pavilion entrance. His instructor badge caught the light as he moved to address the 3 candidates who'd finished so far. Good work on the ruck march. Your next evolution is land navigation. You'll receive coordinates for 5 points that you must locate within a 4-hour window. Standard compass and map work. No GPS. No digital assistance. Accuracy matters more than speed. Arriving at the wrong coordinates counts as a failed checkpoint. He handed each candidate a sealed envelope. Do not open these until you reach your start point, which is marked on the attached map. You have 40 minutes until your start time. Use this period to hydrate, eat, and prepare your navigation equipment. Kira took her envelope and moved to a corner of the pavilion where she could focus. She pulled out her compass and map from her kit, checking both instruments for accuracy. The compass was standard military issue, reliable if you knew how to use it properly. The map showed the training area in detail, topographic lines indicating elevation changes that would affect navigation decisions. Martinez sat down nearby, working on her own navigation prep. You seem really comfortable with all this. First time through assessment? First time. Kira confirmed the compass's declination adjustment. But not the first time doing this kind of work. My father taught me land navigation when I was 10 years old. We'd go out in the wilderness, and he'd give me coordinates to find. No time limits at first, just accuracy. Then as I got better, he'd add time pressure and weather complications. Must be nice having that background. Martinez's tone carried no resentment, just acknowledgement. Some of us are learning this stuff for the first time under pressure. Everyone has different strengths. Kira looked at Martinez directly. You finished the ruck march with good time, and you maintained your form through the water crossing. That's not nothing. Diaz joined them with his map already marked. What do you think they're testing with the navigation? Obviously, it's about finding the points, but what's the real assessment? Decision-making under ambiguity. Torres answered the question from where he stood near the pavilion entrance. Both candidates turned to look at him. Navigation in the field is never perfect. Weather changes. Terrain doesn't match maps exactly. Equipment fails. We're testing whether you can make good decisions when the information you have is incomplete and the stakes are real. Vega appeared beside Torres. She held a tablet that displayed what looked like tracking data. The remaining candidates are finishing the ruck march now. 2 more completed within standard. One withdrew at checkpoint 4 with knee pain. That leaves 5 of you proceeding to navigation. She looked at each candidate in turn. The attrition rate in week 1 is typically 40%. You're already seeing that play out. Patterson joined the group of instructors. He addressed the candidates who were preparing their navigation equipment. Some advice for the next evolution. Trust your compass. Trust your pace count. When terrain and map don't seem to match, trust your fundamentals and keep moving. The people who fail navigation usually fail because they second-guess themselves into paralysis. Kira finished her equipment check and packed everything into her day pack. The sealed envelope with her coordinates sat on top, ready to be opened at the start point. Her watch showed 32 minutes until start time. She used the remaining period to eat an energy bar and drink water, fueling her body for the next 4 hours of work. Martinez was watching her with an expression that suggested curiosity mixed with assessment. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead. Why are you here?" "You move like someone who's been operating for years. Your navigation prep is expert level. You finished the ruck march like it was a morning jog. This assessment is supposed to be breaking people, but you look like you're just going through routine training." Kira considered the question before answering. "I've been in an admin role for 8 months. This assessment is my chance to do the work I trained for. As for why it seems routine, that's just preparation. My father used to say that if training feels comfortable, you're not training hard enough. So I never trained for comfort. I trained for capability under the worst conditions I could imagine." Martinez nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Your father sounded like he knew what he was doing." "He did." Kira stood and shouldered her day pack. "Marine Force Recon. He learned from the best and taught me everything they taught him. Now I get to find out if that preparation was enough." The navigation star point was marked with a simple stake driven into the ground. Vega stood there with her tablet and stopwatch, her expression showing the same professional neutrality she'd maintained throughout the day. "Lieutenant Vanson, you may open your envelope and begin when ready. Your 4-hour window starts when you take your first step." Kira opened the envelope and pulled out a card with 5 sets of coordinates written in neat block letters. Each coordinate pair represented a point she'd need to locate and photograph within the time limit. She studied them for 30 seconds, committing them to memory while also plotting them roughly on her mental map of the training area. The points were distributed across challenging terrain, requiring navigation through hills, dense vegetation, and at least one section of what the map indicated was rocky ground. She checked her compass bearing for the first point and began walking. The stopwatch in Vega's hand clicked as she passed the stake. For hours had begun. The first coordinate was 2.7 miles northeast through terrain that started relatively open but would become more challenging. Kira moved at a steady pace, counting steps to track distance while checking her compass every few minutes to confirm bearing. The sun climbed higher, turning the California morning into midday heat that added another layer of difficulty to the exercise. At 1.3 miles, she stopped to reassess. The terrain had shifted more dramatically than the map suggested, a small ravine cutting across her planned route. She had 2 options: follow the ravine until it shallowed enough to cross, or climb down and back up the far side. The ravine route would add time, but reduce risk. The direct route would be faster, but more demanding. She chose direct. The climb down required careful foot placement and using vegetation for handholds. The bottom of the ravine held standing water that soaked her boots again. The climb up the far side tested her leg strength after the morning's ruck march. But she emerged on the correct bearing and continued toward the first point. The coordinate marker appeared exactly where her navigation indicated it should be, a small reflective tag attached to a tree at chest height. She photographed it with her phone, confirming the timestamp and location data would prove she'd reached the correct point. 1 down. For remaining. She checked her watch. 47 minutes elapsed. The second point required a bearing change to southwest, taking her across the training area's central ridge. The climb was sustained, not technical, but demanding after the morning's exertions. Kira's legs burned with accumulated fatigue, but she maintained pace, treating the discomfort as information rather than limitation. At the ridge top, She paused to confirm her position using terrain association. The map showed a distinctive rock formation that should be visible from this elevation. She located it to her east, confirming her position was accurate. The second coordinate point lay downslope on the far side of the ridge. The descent required different muscle engagement than the climb, her quads absorbing impact with each step. Halfway down, she encountered another candidate. Diaz was checking his map with an expression that suggested uncertainty. He looked up as Kira approached. "You look like you know where you're going." His voice carried frustration. "I'm starting to think my compass is off. What's your next coordinate?" Kira stopped beside him. She had time to spare, and helping another candidate wasn't against the rules as long as she found her own points independently. Diaz showed her his card. The coordinates matched her second point. "We're heading to the same location. Your compass is probably fine." Kira gestured toward the terrain below them. "The rock content in this area can cause local magnetic anomalies. Trust your last known good position and dead reckon from there." "What was your previous checkpoint?" "The ridge top marker about half a mile back." Diaz pointed in the direction he'd come from. "Then you're close. The point should be about 300 meters downslope on a bearing of 205 from where we're standing." Kira checked her own compass to confirm. "Follow that bearing and trust your pace count." "Thanks." Diaz's expression showed relief mixed with embarrassment. "I was about to waste an hour backtracking." They descended together, each counting their own paces and maintaining their own navigation. The second coordinate marker appeared on a tree near a dry stream bed. Both candidates photographed it. Diaz checked his watch and swore quietly. "I've burned 2 hours and only found 2 points. I'm not going to make the time standard. You've got 2 hours left and 3 points to find." Kira studied her card for the third coordinate. "That's 40 minutes per point if you move efficiently. It's tight, but possible. What's your time looking like?" Diaz asked the question with genuine curiosity rather than competition. "I'm at 1 hour, 18 minutes for 2 points." Kira shouldered her pack. "If I maintain pace, I'll finish with time to spare. But I've trained for this specific skill set for years. Don't compare your performance to mine. Compare it to your own baseline and focus on improving." "That's good advice." Diaz nodded and checked his next bearing. "Good luck with the rest of your points." They separated, each heading toward their third coordinates along different bearings. Kira moved through increasingly dense vegetation, pushing through brush that grabbed at her uniform and pack. The third point was the farthest from the start, requiring her to cover nearly 4 miles from the second marker. At 3 miles, she encountered terrain that the map showed as clear, but was actually overgrown with thick scrub. Rather than fight through it, she made a tactical decision to skirt the edge, adding distance but maintaining speed. The detour cost her 10 minutes, but saved the energy she would have burned forcing through the vegetation. The third marker appeared on a post in a small clearing. She photographed it and checked her time. 2 hours 9 minutes for 3 points. She had 1 hour 51 minutes to find the final 2 coordinates. The math was still comfortable. The fourth point required backtracking toward the training area's western edge. Kira adjusted her bearing and moved at a faster pace, confident in her navigation and willing to push her speed. The terrain cooperated, mostly open ground with gentle slopes that allowed for quick movement. She found the fourth marker at 2 hours 43 minutes. 1 point remaining. 1 hour 17 minutes left. The final coordinate was back near the start point, a deliberate test to see if candidates could maintain accuracy when fatigued and potentially rushing to beat the clock. Kira took a moment to drink water and catch her breath. The final bearing would take her through terrain she'd already crossed, which meant she could navigate partly from memory rather than constant compass checks. She began the final leg at a sustainable jog, her pack bouncing against her back, her boots finding rhythm on ground that had become familiar. The fifth marker appeared with 38 minutes remaining on the clock. She photographed it and began the return to the finish point. Vega was waiting there along with Patterson and Torres. Martinez had already finished and was sitting in the recovery area looking exhausted but satisfied. Vega checked her tablet as Kira arrived. "Lieutenant Vanson, 3 hours 22 minutes. All 5 points verified with correct coordinates and timestamps. She made notes on her screen. Outstanding performance. Report to recovery and prepare for your afternoon evolution. Kira moved to the recovery area and dropped her pack beside Martinez. The other woman looked over with an expression that mixed respect and disbelief. You finished with 38 minutes to spare. How? Good navigation is about efficiency and decision-making. Kira pulled out water and drank deeply. I had to make a detour around heavy vegetation at point 3. That choice cost me 10 minutes, but saved energy. The time I saved by not getting lost made up for the detour, and then some. Torres approached with 2 other candidates behind him. Diaz was one of them, looking worn but determined. The other was a younger man Kira hadn't spoken with yet. Torres addressed the group. 4 of you completed navigation within the time standard. 1 candidate is still on course, but unlikely to finish in time. That person will be withdrawn from assessment when the time limit expires. He pulled up a schedule on his tablet. Your afternoon evolution is tactical decision-making under stress. You'll be presented with scenarios that have no clear right answer. We're testing how you think when information is incomplete and time pressure is severe. You have 1 hour to eat, hydrate, and mentally prepare. Use it well. Patterson joined Torres and addressed the group. Some of you are wondering why we're pushing so hard on day 1. The answer is simple. In operational environments, bad days stack on top of each other. You don't get to be fresh and rested when critical decisions need to be made. We're simulating that reality. By the end of today, you'll be tired, hungry, and mentally strained. That's when we'll really see who you are. Vega was reviewing data on her tablet. She looked up at the assembled candidates. Of the 7 who started this morning, 4 remain in assessment. That's a 57% attrition rate in 1 day. Tomorrow will be harder. Day 3 will be harder still. The people who make it through week 1 will have proven they can handle sustained difficulty. That's the minimum requirement for this program. Kira ate mechanically, fueling her body while her mind ran through what the afternoon might hold. Tactical decision making under stress could take many forms. Scenario planning, ethical dilemmas, resource allocation under time pressure, threat assessment with incomplete information. The variables were endless, but the fundamentals were consistent. Gather information quickly, assess options rationally, make decisions confidently, and accept the consequences without hesitation. Martinez leaned over. You look like you're preparing for a chess match. In a way, I am. Kira finished her energy bar and reached for more water. Tactical thinking is pattern recognition combined with logical analysis. The scenarios they present won't have clear solutions, which means success is measured by the quality of your reasoning rather than the outcome of your choice. That's a very analytical way to approach it. Martinez smiled slightly. I tend to trust my gut in situations like that. Gut instinct is just pattern recognition your brain does subconsciously. Kira returned the smile. Trusting it isn't wrong, but being able to articulate why you made the choice after the fact shows you understand your own decision-making process. That's what they're really testing. Diaz had been listening to their conversation. You sound like an instructor, not a candidate. Just someone who's thought a lot about how decisions get made under pressure. Kira stood and shouldered her nearly empty pack. My father used to create scenarios for me when I was growing up. Tactical problems with no perfect solutions. He'd make me explain my reasoning for whatever choice I made. The explanation mattered more than the choice itself. Torres called out from the instructor area. Candidates, your afternoon evolution begins in 15 minutes. Report to Building 3 for scenario briefing. Move with purpose. Building 3 was configured differently than the other structures in the evaluation compound. The interior looked like an operations center, with multiple screens displaying maps, intelligence reports, and real-time data feeds. 4 workstations were set up, each isolated by partitions that prevented candidates from seeing each other's work. The lighting was deliberately harsh, the kind that added to fatigue rather than relieving it. Vega stood at the front of the room beside a large display screen. The 4 remaining candidates arranged themselves facing her, their body language showing the accumulated strain of a day that had started before dawn and showed no signs of ending soon. Behind Vega, Torres and Patterson waited with tablets ready to record responses and evaluate decision-making processes. This evolution tests your ability to make tactical decisions under time pressure with incomplete information. Vega's voice carried the authority of someone who'd been through scenarios far more demanding than anything she was about to present. You'll each work independently at your assigned station. You'll receive a series of scenarios via the terminal. Each scenario presents a tactical situation requiring immediate decision. You'll have 60 seconds to read the scenario, analyze options, make your choice, and input your reasoning. Patterson stepped forward to continue the briefing. There are no right answers. Every choice has consequences. We're evaluating the quality of your reasoning, your ability to prioritize under pressure, and whether you can articulate your decision-making process clearly. Some scenarios will have obvious bad choices and less bad choices. Some will force you to choose between competing values. All of them will be uncomfortable. Torres gestured toward the workstations. You'll complete 10 scenarios. The entire evolution will last approximately 20 minutes, including processing time between scenarios. At the end, you'll have a 5-minute verbal debrief where you'll defend your choices to the instructor panel. Questions? None of the candidates spoke. The exhaustion on their faces suggested they were conserving energy for what came next, rather than seeking clarification that wouldn't change the fundamental challenge. Take your stations. Vega pointed to the assigned positions. Begin when your terminal activates. Kira moved to workstation 3 and sat in the chair facing the screen. The terminal showed a countdown timer set to 60 seconds but not yet activated. She took a breath and centered herself, pushing aside the fatigue and focusing on the task ahead. Decision-making under pressure was something she trained for, though usually in the context of split-second shooting choices rather than ethical dilemmas. The fundamentals were the same. Assess quickly, decide confidently, execute without hesitation. The terminal activated. The first scenario appeared on screen. You are leading a 4-person team on a reconnaissance mission in hostile territory. Your team discovers a cache of enemy weapons that could be used to harm civilians. You have 2 options. Destroy the cache immediately, which will create noise and reveal your position to nearby enemy forces, or mark the location and continue your mission, requesting air support to destroy it later. Enemy forces will likely move the cache if you wait. Nearby civilians could be harmed if enemy forces detect your team. You have 60 seconds to decide. Kira's mind processed the variables. Immediate action saved civilian lives but endangered her team. Delayed action preserved team safety but allowed enemy forces to potentially relocate the weapons. The scenario forced a choice between protecting civilians now or protecting team members. She typed a response. Choice: destroy the cache immediately. Reasoning: the primary mission is reconnaissance, but preventing civilian casualties takes priority when the opportunity exists. The risk to the team is manageable if we execute the destruction efficiently and use the resulting confusion to extract along a pre-planned alternate route. Accepting risk to save lives is justified when the team has training and capability to manage that risk. The terminal accepted her response and displayed the next scenario without pause. No feedback on whether her choice was correct or incorrect, just the relentless progression to the next decision. Scenario 2 involved resource allocation during a humanitarian crisis. Scenario 3 presented an intelligence dilemma where sharing information could save lives but compromise a source. Scenario 4 forced a choice between mission success and team safety. Each scenario demanded immediate analysis and confident decision-making, while the 60-second timer counted down with merciless precision. By Scenario 7, Kira felt the mental fatigue accumulating alongside the physical exhaustion from the day's earlier evolutions. The scenarios were deliberately designed to erode confidence and create doubt. Second-guessing became tempting when every choice carried consequences and no option was clearly superior. Scenario 8 appeared on her screen. You are providing overwatch for a team conducting a high-value target capture. You observe through your scope that a civilian vehicle is approaching the team's position. The vehicle matches intelligence reports of enemy tactics. You have clear shot on the driver. Rules of engagement require positive identification before engaging. The vehicle is 30 seconds from your team's position. Waiting for positive identification may cost team members their lives. Engaging without positive identification may kill innocent civilians. Decide now. Kira's training and instincts pulled in opposite directions. Every fiber of her shooting background said, take the shot, protect the team. Her understanding of rules of engagement and ethical warfare said wait for confirmation. The 60-second timer showed 45 seconds remaining. She typed quickly, choice, do not engage. Establish communication with team and recommend immediate defensive positioning. Maintain aim on driver and prepare to engage if positive threat indicators appear. Reasoning, rules of engagement exist to prevent civilian casualties in ambiguous situations. My role as Overwatch is to provide information and protection, not to make threat determinations without required identification. The team has training to respond to vehicle threats. Violating ROE creates strategic problems beyond this single engagement. The scenarios continued through 10. Each one forced choices between competing priorities. Mission versus safety. Immediate action versus strategic patience. Individual risk versus collective benefit. By the final scenario, Kira's hands were slightly unsteady from accumulated stress, but her reasoning remained clear. She made her choices based on principles rather than emotion, accepting that some of those choices might lead to bad outcomes, but trusting that consistent application of sound reasoning was more valuable than perfect results. The terminal went dark. A message appeared directing her to report to the debrief area. She stood from the workstation and moved to where Vega, Patterson, and Torres waited with their tablets, displaying her responses. Vega spoke first. Lieutenant Vanson, you completed all 10 scenarios within the time limits. Your reasoning was consistently articulated and grounded in tactical doctrine. Now, defend your choices. She pulled up Scenario 8 on the large display screen. This one in particular. You chose not to engage the approaching vehicle. That choice could have resulted in your team being killed. Explain. Kira met Vega's eyes directly. Rules of engagement serve strategic purposes beyond individual engagements, ma'am. Shooting civilians creates intelligence problems, erodes local support, and undermines mission objectives. My role as Overwatch was to provide protection and information, not to make threat assessments beyond my available data. I communicated the threat and maintained capability to engage if positive indicators appeared. But your team could have died while you waited for those indicators. Patterson's question carried challenge rather than curiosity. Yes, sir, they could have. Kira didn't back away from the implication. That risk is inherent in ethical warfare. We accept some risk to ourselves to avoid causing harm to civilians. If we shoot everyone who might be a threat, we become the threat. Torres leaned forward. What if I told you that in the real scenario this was based on the vehicle was carrying explosives and the team was killed because the Overwatch sniper hesitated? Then the outcome was tragic, sir. Kira's voice remained steady, but the principle remains sound. We can't make tactical decisions based on outcomes we can't predict. We have to make them based on sound reasoning with the information available. Sometimes sound reasoning leads to bad outcomes. That doesn't mean the reasoning was wrong. The three instructors exchanged glances. Vega made notes on her tablet before looking up. Let's discuss Scenario 1. You chose to destroy the weapons cache and risk your team. Why prioritize civilian lives over trained operators? Because trained operators accept risk as part of their role, ma'am. Civilians don't. Kira kept her posture relaxed but attentive. My team had training, equipment, and capability to manage the risk we'd incur by destroying the cache. The civilians had none of those things if enemy forces used those weapons against them. When I can prevent harm by accepting manageable risk, that's the choice I make. Even if it costs you team members? Patterson pressed the question. Even then, sir, losing team members is a tragedy. Allowing civilians to die when we could have prevented it is a moral failure. The two aren't equivalent. Vega set down her tablet. Lieutenant, most candidates struggle with these scenarios because they're looking for the right answer. You approach them differently. You applied consistent principles and accepted that sometimes those principles lead to difficult outcomes. That's exactly the mindset we need in the field. Torres stood and moved to stand beside the display screen. You finished all 10 scenarios with clear reasoning, and you've defended your choices without hesitation under our questioning. That's exceptional performance on a day where you've already completed a 12-mile ruck march and a 4-hour navigation exercise. How are you maintaining this level of function? Training and mental discipline, sir. Kira allowed herself a slight smile. My father used to run me through tactical problems after hard physical training. He said that's when decisions matter most, when you're tired and hungry and you still have to think clearly. So I learned to function in that state. Patterson pulled up data on his tablet. According to our monitoring, your heart rate never exceeded 120 during the scenario evolution. Most candidates hit 140 or higher. You stayed remarkably calm under pressure that's designed to create stress. Stress interferes with decision-making, sir. Kira's response was matter-of-fact. I've trained myself to recognize stress responses and compensate for them. The scenarios were uncomfortable, but they weren't life-threatening. Maintaining perspective helps maintain calm. Vega stood and addressed all 4 candidates who'd completed the evolution. You finished day 1 of assessment. Report to your quarters. You have 4 hours to eat, clean your gear, and sleep. Tomorrow begins at 0500 with physical training followed by weapons qualifications. The remaining days of week 1 will continue at this intensity. Use your rest time wisely. The candidates were dismissed. Kira walked toward her quarters alongside Martinez, who looked like she was moving on pure determination rather than remaining energy. Martinez spoke quietly, her voice showing strain. How are you not destroyed right now? I feel like I've been hit by a truck. I'm tired. Kira acknowledged it without complaint. But tired is just a state. It doesn't prevent function if you don't let it. You make it sound so simple. Martinez managed a tired laugh. It's not simple. It's just trained. Kira stopped at the entrance to the quarters building. Get food and sleep. Tomorrow will be harder. 3 weeks passed in a blur of evaluations that tested every aspect of capability beyond shooting. Physical endurance tests pushed candidates to their breaking points and then demanded they continue. Navigation exercises grew progressively more complex, adding night operations and adverse weather conditions. Tactical scenarios became layered with ambiguity and time pressure that made clear decisions nearly impossible. Of the 4 candidates who'd survived day 1, only 2 remained by the end of week 2, Kira and Martinez. The final evaluation took place on a range Kira hadn't seen before. It was larger than the standard training facilities, with targets positioned at distances that exceeded normal operational requirements. The observation deck was crowded with officers whose presence suggested this assessment carried weight beyond a simple qualification exercise. She recognized the 3 generals who'd watched her initial drill 3 weeks earlier. Commander Thatcher stood beside them. Walcott was there, along with Vega, Patterson, and Torres. Other faces she didn't recognize filled the remaining space, their uniform insignia indicating senior leadership from multiple commands. Vega addressed Kira and Martinez from the range control position. This is your final evaluation. You've proven you can handle physical demands, navigate under pressure, and make sound tactical decisions when exhausted. Now we test whether you can integrate all of those skills while executing your primary specialty under conditions that simulate actual operations. Patterson pulled up a display showing the range layout. You'll each complete a modified version of the advanced sweep drill. 6 targets at varying distances. 3 firing positions requiring transitions under time pressure. However, this iteration includes additional complications. You'll navigate to each position using coordinates rather than marked flags. You'll conduct the drill after completing a 3-meal approach under load. and you'll make tactical decisions at each position that affect which targets you engage and in what order. Torres stepped forward with equipment manifests. You'll carry 50 pounds of gear during the approach. Your rifle selection is unrestricted. Choose any weapon system from the armory. Time standard for the entire evolution, including approach and engagement, is 45 minutes. Questions? What are the tactical decision parameters at each position? Kira asked the question with genuine interest rather than concern. You'll receive scenario information at each firing point. Patterson's response was deliberately vague. The scenarios will require you to prioritize targets based on threat assessment. Your choices will be evaluated as part of your overall performance. Martinez went first. She chose an M4 platform and loaded her approach pack with the required weight. The observation deck watched as she navigated to the first position, received her scenario briefing, and began engaging targets. Her performance was solid, competent, showing the skills she developed over 3 weeks of intensive training. She completed the evolution in 38 minutes with good accuracy and reasonable tactical choices. Then it was Kira's turn. She moved to the equipment selection area where dozens of rifles waited in their racks. Her hand settled on the same MK-13 Mod 7 she'd used 3 weeks earlier. Rourke's rifle, the bolt-action precision platform that most operators wouldn't choose for a drill requiring speed and multiple target engagements. Torres noticed her selection. You're choosing a bolt gun again, Lieutenant? Yes, Chief. Kira checked the rifle's condition with practiced efficiency. Same reasoning as before. The targets at extreme range require precision. The time constraint is challenging but manageable. She loaded her pack and began the 3-meal approach. The navigation was straightforward after weeks of similar exercises. She reached the first firing position at 12 minutes elapsed, well ahead of the time curve she needed to maintain. The scenario briefing waited there on a tablet. Position 1 scenario. You observe 3 targets. Alpha is an armed hostile at close range, presenting immediate threat. Bravo is an armed individual at medium range whose status is unclear. Charlie is a confirmed high-value target at extreme range attempting to escape. You have time to engage 2 targets before the third escapes or engages you. Choose. Kira processed the scenario in seconds. Engage Alpha first to eliminate immediate threat, then engage Charlie to prevent high-value target escape. Accept risk that Bravo might be hostile, but prioritize certain threats over uncertain ones. She made her engagements accordingly, the bolt-action rifle speaking twice with the precision that had become her signature. Both targets rang with center mass hits. The transitions between positions tested her efficiency. Low crawl under observation wire. Lateral movement across open ground. Climb to elevated platform, all while carrying weight that accumulated against already fatigued muscles. At each position, a new tactical scenario required instant assessment and target prioritization. Position 2 forced a choice between protecting civilians or pursuing enemy forces. She chose civilian protection. Position 3 presented a dilemma about engaging a target who might be using human shields. She held fire and recommended alternate tactical approaches in her verbal response to the scenario. The final position was the elevated platform she'd used 3 weeks earlier. The scenario there was the most complex yet. Final scenario. 3 targets at extreme range. All 3 are confirmed hostile leadership attempting escape. Target Echo is at 1,200 meters. Target Foxtrot is at 1,800 meters. Target Golf is at 2,200 meters. You have 3 rounds and 90 seconds. Wind is variable and increasing. Light is fading. All 3 targets are moving. Engage in whatever order you assess as optimal. Kira studied the targets through her scope. 2,200 meters was beyond what most snipers train for. The wind flag showed gusts that would make accurate fire extremely difficult. The fading light added another complication. All 3 targets were moving, though slowly. This was the ultimate test of her capability under pressure. She made her assessment. Golf first despite being hardest shot, because if she waited the wind would worsen. Foxtrot second while conditions were still manageable. Echo last as the closest and most achievable even if conditions deteriorated further. The first shot at 2,200 meters required calculations that pushed the limits of the scope's capability. She waited for a lull in the wind, read the mirage patterns, adjusted for the moving target's direction and speed. The rifle spoke. 3 seconds of bullet flight time felt like forever. Target golf rang with an impact that drew gasps from the observation deck. Bolt cycle. New round. Target Foxtrot at 1,800 meters. The wind had picked up slightly, but was still manageable. She adjusted her hold and pressed the trigger. The second target rang before the echo of the first shot had finished rolling across the range. Final round. Target echo at 1,200 meters was almost routine compared to what she'd just accomplished. The shot broke clean, and the target confirmed impact, while observers on the deck stood in stunned silence. Kira cleared the rifle and descended from the platform. She completed the entire evolution, including the 3-meal approach and all tactical decisions, in 31 minutes. 14 minutes under the time standard. Perfect accuracy on all required engagements, including a shot at 2,200 meters that exceeded anything in standard training protocols. The observation deck erupted in conversation that wasn't quite applause, but carried the same energy. Vega met her at the base of the platform with an expression that mixed professional assessment with something approaching awe. Lieutenant Vanson, that was the most exceptional shooting performance I've witnessed in 15 years of running evaluations. The 2,200-meter shot in variable wind on a moving target isn't just difficult. It's supposed to be impossible under time pressure. General Bridger descended from the observation deck with the other senior officers following. He stopped in front of Kira and, for a moment, just studied her face as if trying to understand what combination of genetics and training had produced what he'd just witnessed. Lieutenant, 3 weeks ago, you completed an advanced drill that made us reconsider everything we thought we knew about your capabilities. Today you've done it again, under conditions significantly more demanding. He paused, and everyone on the range went quiet. On behalf of the assessment board, I'm pleased to inform you that you've been selected for the Specialized Operations Program. You'll receive your new assignment and clearances within 72 hours. Thatcher stepped forward. Lieutenant Vanson, I need to say something publicly that I should have said 3 weeks ago. When you requested to run that first drill, I laughed. I assumed you didn't belong on an operational range. I was completely wrong. You've proven yourself to be not just competent, but exceptional. The Navy is fortunate to have you, and I'm fortunate to have learned from my mistake in underestimating you. Walcott joined the group. On behalf of the assessment cadre, congratulations, Lieutenant. You've set new performance standards across multiple evaluation categories. The data from your assessment will be used to refine our program for future candidates. Torres approached with Rourke beside him. Lieutenant, about my rifle. Rourke gestured toward the MK-13 she still carried. You've now used it twice to accomplish things I didn't think were possible with that platform. I think it belongs with you more than me. Martinez came over and offered her hand. Congratulations. I knew after day 1 that you were operating at a different level than the rest of us. Watching you work these past 3 weeks has been educational and humbling. If you enjoyed the story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you've had a similar situation happen to you before. Maybe you've witnessed someone prove their doubters wrong, or perhaps you've been underestimated yourself and found the strength to demonstrate your true capability. General Fenwick was reviewing data on his tablet. Lieutenant, your new assignment will involve working with a specialized unit that handles situations requiring capabilities beyond standard operational parameters. You'll receive detailed briefings once your clearances are processed. What I can tell you now is that the unit specifically requested someone with your unique combination of precision shooting and tactical decision-making ability. General Cortland added, you'll be operating in environments where there's no backup, no second chances, and no room for error. Everything you've demonstrated over these 3 weeks suggests you're ready for that responsibility. The sun was setting over Coronado, turning the sky orange and pink above the Pacific. Kira stood surrounded by officers who 3 weeks earlier had watched her prove she could shoot. Today they'd watched her prove she could do everything else that mattered. The journey from armory maintenance to specialized operations had taken 8 months of patience, followed by 3 weeks of relentless evaluation. But standing there with a rifle that had become an extension of her capability, knowing she'd be assigned to work that would challenge everything she trained for, she felt the satisfaction of being exactly where she was meant to be. Vega approached one final time. "Lieutenant, you start your new assignment Monday. That gives you 72 hours to rest and prepare. Use them well. Where you're going, the evaluations never stop. Every mission is an assessment. Every shot matters. Every decision carries weight." "I understand, ma'am." Kira's response was steady, confident, carrying the certainty of someone who'd spent their entire life preparing for exactly this moment. "I'm ready." The observation deck began to clear as officers returned to their duties. The range settled into evening quiet. Martinez walked with Kira toward the equipment return area. "You know what's funny? I spent 3 weeks training beside you, and I still don't fully understand how you do what you do." "Practice and preparation." Kira handed the MK-13 to the armorer for cleaning and storage. "My father used to say that excellence isn't a destination. It's a direction you choose and maintain regardless of obstacles. I just kept moving in that direction long enough that it became who I am rather than what I do. That's a good philosophy." Martinez looked out at the range where targets still stood waiting for the next evaluation, the next candidate, the next opportunity to prove capability under pressure. "I hope wherever they send you, it's worth the journey to get there." "It will be." Kira said it with complete confidence. Not because she knew what the assignment would involve, but because she knew that whatever challenges came next, she'd spent a lifetime preparing to meet them. The commanders who'd once dismissed her now recognized her capabilities. The operators who'd once doubted her now understood her worth. The system that had placed her in a maintenance role for 8 months had finally aligned her assignment with her abilities. And ahead lay work that would test everything she'd proven over these 3 weeks and everything she'd trained for since she was 8 years old. The journey from underestimated to essential was complete. The next chapter was about to begin.